This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast. Yet another week in which we ask, what the hell is going on? Mark, what the hell's going on?
Well, what the hell's going on is negotiations have begun with Iran to dismantle its nuclear program. And already the chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, the master of the art of the deal, has preemptively conceded that dismantlement is our position now, but it may not be our final position. So, not a good start. I think to set the table for our discussion and our guest, I think we need to put the situation in context. We now have a window of opportunity to end the Iranian nuclear program that we've never had before and may never have again, and that will close in a period of time. Iran is weaker than it has ever been since the revolution in 1979. They've lost most of their proxies around the world. Hamas is decimated. Hezbollah's leadership has been taken out. Trump is pummeling the Houthis right now, and they're not capable of doing much to Israel while they're under Trumpian pummeling. They've lost their number one Arab ally and only Arab ally in the Assad regime. Russia is otherwise occupied trying to get them to provide drones to fight the Ukrainians, so they can't count on a lot of help from Russia. And they've also lost their air defenses and their ballistic missile capability because they twice attacked Israel and failed, which gave Israel the pretext to go and take out their air defenses and their ballistic missile capabilities, though they didn't strike the nuclear program or their oil. But they're strategically naked, and they're unable to retaliate either directly or by proxy. That is the situation now. That may not be the situation in a year from now. And so there's a moment now where Donald Trump has, as he likes to say, all the cards, right? He's got the cards. Putin doesn't have the cards. Zelensky doesn't have the cards. Well, guess what? Ayatollah Khamenei doesn't have any cards either. And so this is the moment to press your advantage, to use your leverage and get them to actually dismantle the program or lose it. And I don't get the feeling that Witkoff quite understands this. So I'm worried that we've got the wrong guy pressing Trump's advantage in negotiations with the Iranians, and that's troublesome to me.
Right. I mean, I think you're exactly right, Mark. And, in addition to all of the weaknesses that you laid out, the Iranian rial is at its lowest point ever in history against the U.S. dollar. So their economy is in a shambles.
30% inflation.
They have terrible inflation. They have a very restive population, even though they have a police state. Ayatollah Khamenei is no spring chicken. Now, he wasn't a spring chicken 10 years ago either. And, I always say there's nothing for longevity like being a dictator in one of these countries in the Middle East, because Ayatollah Khamenei shows no sign that he's about to keel over and die, but he will.
Even Castro died eventually.
Yeah, even Castro, even Hafez al-Assad, Ayatollah Khomeini, they all die eventually. But the Iranians still don't know, and they're very nervous about what the future is going to bring, who the next supreme leader is going to be, and everything else. But there's an additional factoid here as well, which is that Iran has, per the International Atomic Energy Agency, has enough 60% highly enriched uranium to fuel a nuclear bomb every single month. Now, obviously you have to up the enrichment from 60%, but just so people understand, just a little mnemonic, all the difficulty in enrichment is at the front end. In other words, it's much harder to get to 20% than it is to get from 20 to 60%, and even easier to get from 60 to 95, 98, 99, whatever it is that they need. So the Iranians are effectively in the position of being a nuclear breakout state, but they have not, as far as we know, put together a nuclear weapon yet or shared that nuclear weapons technology with their terrorist proxies and their creepy friends. So again, this is an incredibly pivotal moment. And, we've been saying for years, do or die, it's do or die. Well, guess what? It's still do or die. And I think
more do or die than ever.
It is more do or die than ever. And the fact that the president is, I wrote this, even if Steve Witkoff, and he may be an amazing guy, right? I don't know. But even if Steve Witkoff is an amazing negotiator, even if he is incredibly knowledgeable about Russia, which he isn't, incredibly knowledgeable about Ukraine, which he isn't, incredibly knowledgeable about the Palestinians in Gaza and Hamas, which he isn't, and incredibly knowledgeable not simply about Iran and nuclear proliferation, which, by the way, is not a simple issue. Even if he were amazing at all those three things, you can't do all those three things competently. Each one is a full-time job, and the idea that he's walking in the door by himself, as he did with the Kremlin,
Flying
is just
from Moscow.
batshit.
Negotiating with Putin, and then, like, instead of preparing for the Iran negotiations, he's negotiating with Putin on a completely different subject and just flying around from one to the other. Like, that's the president's job to do that. You've got your negotiator is the one who's supposed to be the master of the details and who does all that work for you.
I had lunch with a journalist friend of mine today, and he said to me, "Hey, in the last administration, we can all agree that, the Secretary of State was a total cipher. But at least the guy who was flying around pretending to be Secretary of State was the Director of Central Intelligence, Bill Burns, who had some experience in this. We've got a guy who's pretending to be Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and the Director of Central Intelligence, all wrapped into one, and he's none of the above."
Yeah. So what it seems like the Iranians are doing right now is they are proposing to do basically JCPOA 2, the Obama nuclear deal 2. They want us to lift our sanctions, lift the economic pressure on them in exchange for a weak deal that allows them to preserve their enrichment capability and all the rest of it. I still continue to believe that Donald Trump is not going to go for that. I will stick to that until I'm proven wrong, in which case I will tell you that I was wrong if it happens on this podcast. But we have in this scenario for President Trump, we have the model for what works and what doesn't work. We know that the JCPOA doesn't work, and why? And we know that because Donald Trump walked away from the JCPOA and got out of it and applied the maximum pressure campaign, and the maximum pressure campaign worked. Iran's support for terrorism. And by the way, the other part of this negotiation is not just the eliminating the nuclear program, eliminating support for terrorism across the Middle East. Maximum pressure can do that. Without a deal, because they had to cut off their funding for all their proxies around the world because they didn't have any money. And if you combine that with what Israel has done to their proxies, that's going to be that alone will be a successful approach, and that would be better than a bad deal. But we do have a model for what is a good deal, which was the Libyan deal, which is that Muammar Gaddafi decided that he wanted to denuclearize, and so he allowed us to come in and send U.S. planes and pack up his nuclear program and all of his centrifuges and all of his missiles and all of his nuclear stuff and send it to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where it still remains to this day. That is the definition of success. And
I am the Iranian foreign minister, wait 1 sec. If I'm the Iranian foreign minister, Arakchi, you know what I say to you when you say that?
What?
And where is Muammar Gaddafi right now?
No, I know that. That's Barack Obama's fault. But I will tell you that if I was in the Trump administration, I would not be proposing a nuclear deal that is worse than one that George W. Bush negotiated. Because that's the definition of failure in Trump world, is that George W. Bush was tougher and more successful than you were. So anything that's beneath the threshold of the Libya nuclear deal should be considered unacceptable. That's just the standard. And, if the Ayatollah Khamenei ends up like Muammar Gaddafi, how did Flashman refer to it? Getting rogered by some rebels someday? That's his problem. The Flashman was a favorite. The Flashman series was a favorite in the Bush administration. But, that's the problem with, again, you look at the world right now, and the problem with what's happening in Ukraine is that people look at Ukraine and say, hey, they had nuclear weapons and they gave them up and look what happened to them. Gaddafi had nuclear weapons and look what happened to him. I mean, this is a problem with the way we've handled those various countries. But I will tell you that that's the standard of success, and they should not be given an alternative. And we certainly should not be preemptively making concessions like some people we know like to do.
Exactly. Amen to that. So to continue this discussion and add a little veneer of expertise to it, we have our good friend, Elliott Abrams. Not that that ever deters me and Mark. Elliott Abrams is a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the chairman of the Tikva Fund and the chairman of the Vandenberg Coalition. He previously served as deputy assistant to the president and deputy national security advisor in the administration of President George W. Bush, where he supervised U.S. policy in the Middle East for the White House, and as a special representative for Iran and Venezuela in Donald Trump's first administration. His most recent and really terrific book, which I have actually read and really recommend, is If You Will It, Rebuilding Jewish Peoplehood for the 21st Century.
Here's our interview. All right. Well, Elliott, welcome to the podcast.
Very happy to be back.
It's
Thank you.
great to have you. So tell us, the Iranians said that they would not engage in direct negotiations with the United States. They'd had indirect negotiations in Oman, and then apparently there was a 45-minute direct negotiation between Witkoff and the Iranian foreign minister. How do you feel the first interaction with Iran went?
I think it's very hard to tell. They gain in the fact that there were not simple direct negotiations. I mean, we said we wanted direct. They wanted this dance about how they would not visibly be together. But it seems to me that they won the first round, the Iranians. I've been trying to follow the statements that Witkoff is making, for that matter, the president's making. It's not easy to figure out what it is that they're saying and what it is that they're demanding. Let me give you an example. Witkoff said on April 15th, the conversation with the Iranians will be much about two critical points. The first is verification of uranium enrichment and ultimately verification on weaponization. Nothing about dismantling. And not only had Waltz, the national security advisor, used the word dismantle, but Witkoff, also April 15th, said Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program, period. Well, which is it? I mean, is it dismantle? Is it verify? Is it eliminate? These are critical differences. And I think my assumption is he is unaware of the importance of speaking carefully.
Well, but I'm sorry. This, to me, this seems like amateur hour. First of all, Witkoff has made a number of statements that strongly suggest to people who follow this issue very closely that what he's basically suggesting is a reboot
He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
of Obama's JCPOA, of Obama's Iran deal, right? That's the first thing. Apparently, they handed over a document that Witkoff did. I mean, if it looks anything like the documents that have been floating around in his other quote-unquote negotiations, God help us. Elliott, do you have any idea whether Witkoff has somebody who understands nuclear proliferation with him? Do you have any idea whether he has somebody who understands Iran with him? We don't have an assistant secretary yet. He hasn't been confirmed, although he has been nominated. If I may use the phrase, what the hell is going on? Do you have any idea?
No. I have the impression that he was alone. Well, he was accompanied in Oman by our ambassador to Oman, who
good.
was a respectable career Foreign Service officer, but not an expert on the Iran nuclear issue. So where is the expert? I think the answer is there is no expert. Same as when he went to see Putin, which he's now done twice. So I think he thinks he understands this fully. I used to work on the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, and every word you say is very carefully read and reread in Ramallah, in, of course, Jerusalem, in Tehran, in Cairo. I mean, every word, because each word means something different. And his use of language like verification versus eliminate suggests he doesn't quite understand that these are two different concepts with two very, very different meanings. I mean, here's what strikes me, and it gets back to what you were just saying, Danny. We know what the Trump position is supposed to be because he took it in 2018 in his first term. What I'm looking at now is his fact sheet, the White House fact sheet of May 8th, 2018, that said, what does Trump want? He hates the JCPOA. Quote, the Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into, close quote. I agree. And he said it enriched the Iranian regime. Also agree. They didn't come clean about their previous nuclear weapons activity. Also agree. The JCPOA failed to deal with the threat of Iran's missile program. Also agree. So what was the Trump position? We need a deal in which they must never have ICBM, cease developing any nuclear-capable missiles, stop proliferating ballistic missiles to others, cease its support for terrorists, extremists, and regional proxies such as Hezbollah, Hamas, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, end its publicly declared quest to destroy Israel, stop its threats to freedom of navigation, cease escalating the Yemen conflict, end its cyber attacks against the United States, stop its grievous human rights abuses, and stop its unjust detention of foreigners, including U.S. citizens. That's a wonderful list. It's Donald Trump's list. It was Donald Trump's position. The only difference between then and now is, well, there are two big differences. Iran's closer to a nuclear weapon, and Iran is in every other way much weaker. So one would expect a more robust U.S. policy, not a weaker one.
Yeah. So it's clear that Witkoff doesn't know squat about Iran or the Middle East, just like he doesn't know squat about Russia and has had his hat handed to him by Vladimir Putin in every one of their negotiations. But his quality that he's bringing to this supposedly is that he's a master negotiator, right? Like in the mold of Donald J. Trump. So here's what Witkoff says just before the talks. This is a quote. I think our position begins with dismantlement of your program. That is our position today. That doesn't mean, by the way, that at the margin we're not going to find other ways to compromise between our two countries. Where our red line will be, there can't be weaponization of your nuclear capability. So before he went, he made preemptive concessions. I mean, master negotiator, you know, okay, here's our, Danny and I had a colleague on the Senate who shall remain nameless, whose greatest skill was telling people at the outset of negotiations what our absolute red line was.
Preemptive capitulation.
Preemptive capitulation. Yep. Apparently, Witkoff is from the same school of preemptive capitulation. What the hell?
I can't remember which Marx Brothers movie it is in which Groucho says, those are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others.
Exactly.
There you go.
Exactly. That's the problem. But look, what I will tell you, and we should talk about the specifics of Iran's weakness and everything else, but let's just stick with these negotiations for a second. I understand that Donald Trump is not the greatest picker of people, although he likes to say that he is, and he doesn't always have the finest people. But on this, he has, Elliott, as you rightly laid out, had a pretty strong, straightforward position that appeared to be his position. In other words, it wasn't that he was parroting John Bolton or he was parroting Mike Pence or Mike Pompeo. Actually, Donald Trump appeared to think this, and that it was very integral to his repudiation of Barack Obama's foreign policy and his set of priorities, right? He reversed the whole, we're going to see the Middle East through the Shia prism that Obama embraced and went back to the Sunnis. He did the Abraham Accords. I find this inexplicable, actually. You worked for Donald Trump in the first administration. Help us understand what.
Well, it's very difficult. Let's acknowledge first that maybe we're all wrong. Something else is going on simultaneously, which is a striking American military buildup. The second carrier task force and the B-2s in Diego Garcia. That looks like preparation for a strike on Iran. There's an item in the newspapers recently that another big shipment of weaponry has gone or is on its way to Israel. So maybe this is all cover. Now, I actually thought a couple of weeks ago, when the second carrier group and the B-2s to Diego Garcia were announced, that really might be true. I think that much less now because of what we've seen and heard from Witkoff and in the negotiations. But there's a possibility there. If that's not true, if it is a form of negotiating where Trump says, we're going to show them we really have military capability, but has no intention of using it. And in fact, the relevance of that capability is diminished by the way Witkoff is talking. If it's not true, if it's not meant to really corner the Iranians, to scare the Iranians, then what we have here is Trump trying very, very hard just to get a deal. Any deal. Almost any deal. I've asked myself what might stop this. And, maybe the Iranians would stop it. That is, the conditions they demand are so crazy that Trump says, I'm not going to do that. The other thing that might stop it would be if I'm going to come back to what you were saying, Danny, about the JCPOA. I'd use the word derision. That is, already what the Democrats are going to say, because John Kerry said it in an op-ed article. I've forgotten whether it was the New York Times or the Washington Post, but Kerry said, we need a deal with Iran that goes far beyond their nuclear program, that eliminates the missile program and the support for profit. John Kerry. So Trump will be derided for going for JCPOA 2, for Obama 2. All the Democrats will do it, and Republicans will have very few defenses. Now, maybe that has an impact, because the one thing the president really doesn't like, it's being mocked or being derided. So, I'm grasping at straws here to not reach the firm conclusion that what we are seeing with our eyes is really going to be the end of this game. A JCPOA 2, where the Iranians, they ship out some highly enriched uranium. They agree to take some centrifuges offline. They agree to inspections, which of course they did last time. Remember John Kerry saying 24/7 inspection.
On demand.
So they would still have the full infrastructure, and we would lift our sanctions as Obama did and give them tons of money with which to try to rebuild Hezbollah, help the Houthis out, and of course, help their own domestic economy and military. I thought 2 weeks ago that the chances of that were very small, but now I think they've moved above 50-50.
So here's where I would part with you a little bit, is that I haven't heard Trump say anything stupid like Witkoff yet.
Thank God.
So I'm not sure that Witkoff making a fool of himself in Oman and making preemptive concessions means Donald Trump is willing to make those concessions, or that his red lines have changed from the ones that you laid out from 2018. I'm not sure that Trump is on board with with the kind of preemptive concessions Witkoff's making. I would venture to say that probably Israel would not be on board with another JCPOA, and Trump does not control Netanyahu, and Israel could take things into its own hands, though they obviously can't destroy the nuclear program without our help. They can certainly set it back. And I don't know that the Saudis would be happy with a JCPOA too, and they matter to Trump. And I'm not sure the Republicans in Congress would be happy with a JCPOA too. So it's not like this is Witkoff went to Oman and the world is over. There's a lot of factors still coming here that could get this thing back on track. Am I being too? Do I have too many rose-colored pairs of rose-colored glasses on, Elliott, or can we be hopeful that this one weekend is not the end of the process?
Yes, you're right. The president has not said what Witkoff has said. That's gives one hope. However, I mean, on the Republican side, do you really expect Republican senators who have been unwilling to do it so far to stand up and say the president has made a terrible mistake? The president should not have done this deal. I mean, I doubt it. I really doubt it. I mean, name them. Name the ones who are going to break with him publicly over this. I can see a number of people who would say to him and Vance and Waltz and Rubio, this is a big mistake. But if he makes the mistake, maybe even say to the president, this is a big mistake. But once he makes it, I can't name the guys who are going to go out front and denounce it. As for the Israelis, one of the reasons that Iran wants these talks is while they're underway, and obviously Iran's going to try to stretch them out. The president has said he won't let that happen. But while they're underway, maybe 2 months, we ask the Europeans not to snap back the UN sanctions, and we ask the Israelis, freeze, don't do anything. If a deal is reached, let's say in, June, one of the things the Iranians are going to want out of it is no snapback. And they're also going to not want a situation, neither will Trump, where, June 20th, he signs a deal, and June 21st, Israel attacks Iran. So I think he would be making an effort to hold the Israelis back, and that worries me a lot. If he did nothing, they'd just make an independent decision. But if he makes a deal, I think it's very hard for them to publicly denounce the deal and say, well, the hell with you, we're doing it anyway.
So let me ask you this, because we've talked a lot about poor Mr. Witkoff, who apparently is the most energetic man on the face of the earth and the most knowledgeable. What should our policy be? As you said, the Iranians are much weaker than they were in 2015. They have lost Hezbollah, they've lost Assad, they've lost a pathway to Lebanon, they've lost Hamas up to a point. They've lost the Houthis up to a point. Even their Iraqi friends are wavering, and they're sort of relying on sad networks in Somalia to cause trouble and look for support. What should U.S. policy be? What should we do?
Well, I start with the view that Iran is in a weaker position now than it's been really since the Iran-Iraq War. Their proxy network has been largely dismantled by Israel. They've still got the Houthis, but the Houthi ability, for example, to project power to Israel is very, very limited. Their economy is in quite bad shape. There have been some news stories recently about advisors of the Ayatollah Khamenei saying to him, we got to get a deal with the United States because we're under real pressure here. And if they ever attacked us, no one really knows what the impact would be on the survival of the regime. So I think we start from a position of strength and they from weakness. I think our position should be, first on the regional question, no more support for terrorist groups. It's got to stop. None. Now they'll cheat, but if that were part of the deal, there would be a significant reduction. Same on the missile program. What Trump asked for in 2018, real limits on the missile program. And on the nuclear program, I think we should take a very kind of matter-of-fact position. No country has ever enriched to 60% and not gone on to build a nuclear weapon. That's got to be over. The enrichment, that will be permitted, and I don't think we can reverse that 100% at this point and say no enrichment. But even Witkoff has said 3.67%. I mean, the amount you need for nuclear medicine or for nuclear power. And if you won't agree to that, that means, by the way, shipping out all the highly enriched uranium, and it means the destruction of a lot of centrifuges. If you won't agree to that, then the program will have to be destroyed. I'm not suggesting that there be no negotiation, but I am suggesting that they're in a very weak position. And they are the country that is making and has made the Middle East unstable for decades. Syria and Lebanon unstable. They've made Iraq unstable. They decided to attack Israel. They're making Yemen unstable in joining this war against the legitimate government of Yemen. Without them, the Houthis would be unable to close international waterways. So they're at the heart of this. If you want a different Middle East, a peaceful Middle East, then you want a change in the conduct of the regime. And I think the message to the regime is, if you won't change your conduct in all of these ways, then you leave us no choice. Think about it twice and 3 times, because in the aftermath of that kind of attack, what will happen to the future of the regime? I think they know they're at risk. So it's a matter of asserting American strength and willpower.
So I would add to your list of the reasons why Iran is weak also is that after those 2 failed attacks on Israel, Israel took out all their air defenses and their ballistic missile capabilities. So for a period of time, I would venture to say they're strategically naked and really unable to retaliate for a U.S.-Israeli strike. That won't last forever, but at this very moment, this is actually a moment of maximum vulnerability for them.
It is. I think the debate within the administration, if there is a debate, will be between those who say, and here I would think someone like Vice President Vance would be such a person, don't do this. That is, don't attack Iran. This is what you ran against. You're going to turn yourself into George W. Bush. You're going to get into another endless Middle Eastern war. This is everything you're against. Don't do it. And on the other side will be people one assumes like Waltz and Rubio, maybe Hegseth, who will say, no, the analogy here is not Iraq. We're not sending 100,000 troops to Iran. We're not sending one. The analogy is to the Soleimani execution that you did. That took a day. Now, this may not take a day. It may take several days. But it's not a war. People talk about the U.S. war with Iran. It's not a war. It's a strike or a series of strikes.
So we have a model of what not to do, which is the JCPOA. We also have a model of what to do, which is the Libyan deal, which is that the Libyan nuclear program was carted up and flown to Knoxville, Tennessee, and as far as I know, is still there.
Oak Ridge, you can visit.
Oak Ridge, yes. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The model for denuclearization. Now, thanks to Barack Obama, the Iranians may not like what happened to Muammar Gaddafi after he made that deal, and that might be a disincentive to them for that, because we, of course, rewarded him by leading from behind and all the rest of it. And he had a very terrible death.
But it's not the only model. I mean, there are countries, for example, Argentina and Brazil and South Africa, where the government changed and they said, we don't want to deal with nuclear weapons. And they took the program apart with our help, with the IAEA's help. We know what that looks like, too, in a non-combat situation. Any government that wants to do it can do it.
Which their decision to give up their nuclear weapons hasn't exactly been encouraging for the Iranians either.
I'm sure that's true. But this is a case where we have made, 5 presidents, 6 presidents have made the American position clear, and the president keeps restating it, that they can't have a nuclear weapon. Well, how close can they be? I mean, we don't mind if they're weak from a nuclear weapon. That's a concession to Iran that we should not make.
So, Elliott, let me have a little nerdy digression for a moment. The Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, which we pretend is still a really great thing and totally working and totally keeping nuclear proliferation at bay, signed in 1967, had a variety of provisions in it. One was that if a country was in compliance not only with the NPT, but also with its safeguards agreements, that in fact it could engage in nuclear cooperation. The United States, in turn, has the Atomic Energy Act, and we have a provision of law that enables us to cooperate with countries. That is called a 1-2-3 agreement. And we have 1-2-3 agreements with a variety of countries. The United Arab Emirates is one of those countries, and they signed a 1-2-3 agreement that was intended to be what is now called the gold standard. Right? Now, what does that mean? It was a 1-2-3 agreement in which the Emiratis agreed that they would not reprocess uranium. They would not enrich uranium. So I don't understand how it is that our Gulf friends and allies, and the Saudis have obviously said this, can tolerate an agreement with the Iranians that permits them, having violated their own obligations under the NPT, having violated their safeguards agreement, which they never actually really ratified but pretended to, how they can allow them greater nuclear privileges than we allow our best reliable friend in the UAE. Help me understand how we do this and that we are not indeed Barack Obama once again.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Obama, because go back to the Bush administration, George W. Bush. We had something like 6 UN Security Council resolutions on Iran, all unanimous. Unanimous. China, Russia voting with us. Iran may not enrich uranium. Not at all. How did that change? Well, Obama gave it up. Kerry gave it up. I mean, you want to talk about bad negotiating. They didn't bargain for it. They walked away from it. They said, well, of course they're going to want to enrich uranium. So in the George W. Bush administration is when we did the 123 agreement with the United Arab Emirates. And we said, of course, no enrichment. Friend or foe, no enrichment, because we want to avoid proliferation. Now, the Emiratis have commented on the fact that, but then Obama came along and said Iran can enrich. I think that if we ended the Iranian nuclear weapons program, either by agreement or by bombing, they would stick with the 123 agreement and no enrichment. If President Trump, now 10 years after the JCPOA, if President Trump makes a deal with Iran, which allows them to continue enriching, you will see the Saudis and Emiratis saying to us, the Saudis are already saying it, okay, you can't treat your friends worse than your enemies. We want to start enriching. Yes, safeguards, we'll sign up, IAEA, you name it. But it's not possible that they can enrich and we can't. I think they've been waiting to see what the United States does about the Iranian nuclear weapons program. But if we make a deal now that allows it to live, you will see the Emiratis and the Saudis saying, we're not going to take a deal that's worse than that.
So what do we do, Elliott? You ready to
We
go back
bomb
in and
Iran.
take over these negotiations? How do we fix this thing?
Okay,
Fire
first,
Witkoff.
prayer, always first.
Okay, fair enough.
Then firing Witkoff. You could pray for Witkoff too. What you need is a tough-minded, hard negotiator. Somebody like George Shultz, Jim Baker, who's capable of being a really tough negotiator. But again, we go back to the president. The president's got to decide. If the president wants what he used to want in 2018, he may well be able to get it in a negotiation, but only by making it clear to the Iranians, if I don't get it in negotiation, I'm going to get it anyway. And I think that's what's not clear to them. As a tactic for those of us who are very worried about a poor negotiation and worried about a kind of JCPOA 2, I think we should be talking about it now. And I think we should be saying to our friends in the Republican Party in Congress and in the administration, you have no idea the degree of mockery and derision that is going to come your way from Republicans and Democrats. And if you don't think that that crummy deal is going to hurt the president, you're wrong. It's going to hurt him domestically as people tee off on him and on the failure of that policy. And what do you think is the impact it's going to have on Putin and Xi Jinping when they see that weak a negotiation, on getting a deal for Ukraine, on preventing a Chinese invasion of Taiwan? They're going to look at your administration as a bunch of patsies, and that can be avoided. So I think that's the message that we all ought to be sending to the administration now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to ask you something that I don't understand. Actually, I don't understand any of what the hell's going on right now, but let me add something else that I also don't understand. I've told you about my super favorite conversation with one of the president's supporters, one of the current president's supporters back about 20 years ago, a little less, about 18 years ago, when she was asking me if George W. Bush was going to bomb Iran. And you remember there was a lot of speculation that in his waning year/months, he might actually do it. And she said to me, if you don't do it, we will do it. And of course, the answer is No, they wouldn't. And no, they didn't. Bibi Netanyahu has been prime minister of Israel. How many? What? 18, 19, 6 times?
14 or 15.
Many, many times. And each time, and I will say, even when Bibi was out of office, even the opposition, even Ehud Barak and others, say, Iran is moving towards the zone of immunity. Iran is 6 months away. Remember that famous Bibi speech before the UN General Assembly with the cartoon ticking bomb.
Yep.
And yet the Israelis haven't done it. Now, some people say the reason the Israelis haven't done it is because they can't. I don't think they can certainly do something. They may not be able to destroy it, but they could certainly set the program back. Help us understand why it is that the Israelis just haven't done this.
Well, first, as to Bush, why didn't he do it? I think one reason was, if you go back to the Syrian nuclear reactor bombing in 2007, which Bush didn't do, and which the Israelis then did, the argument that some people made, Secretary of Defense Gates, Secretary of State Rice, was, hey, you've already bombed 2 Muslim countries, Afghanistan and Iraq, and you can't keep on just bombing Muslim countries one after
We got to hit the
another.
Vatican.
But I always thought there was another argument, which was that Bush was confident that his successor, President John McCain, was a safe pair of hands. And if the bombing was needed under President McCain, it would happen. And then, of course, though he was leading for a while, Obama won. Why didn't the Israelis bomb then when Bush didn't? I think they came very close in 2012, the summer of 2012, but they had Barack Obama against them, totally, and John Kerry, totally against them. And that made it very tough. I don't think there was a consensus in Israel about doing it, and there is now. It's different. So unless the United States prevents it, if we don't do it, I think they will.
Do you? You really do. And obviously, we've discussed this. In fact, you and I have recently discussed this along with Eyal Hulata, the former Israeli National Security Advisor. And there have been folks who have insinuated that one of the reasons the Israelis haven't done it is that they can't do it. What do you assess about their capabilities?
I don't think that's right. I think they can do a lot. We've seen what they can do from the air. And of course, now the air defenses, as you said, are pretty much gone. Secondly, I think there's likely to be, and I'm imagining this, that is, I've not seen any secret papers, there's likely to be a ground component. The Israelis have done things on the ground in Iran that we can't do. These assassinations or the theft. Remember, getting into this place where the Iranian nuclear files were, getting the file and getting them out of Iran. It's unbelievable. So they have capabilities on the ground. So I'm clear, I think we all are, that the United States Air Force is a lot bigger, has bigger bombs, and would do a larger, better job with fewer days of strikes. But the Israelis can do a lot of damage. And I really think now, as I talk to people, left and right, military and civilian, now there is a consensus, which there wasn't. If you go back to those days, Ehud Barak was against it because he didn't want Bibi to do it. I mean, there was domestic politics. Now I think there's a consensus in Israel after October 7th, 2023, that when people have the ability to kill you, they will try to kill you. And therefore, Iran must be prevented from having that ability. It's possible that Trump would sign an agreement and really strongly try, I hope not, but strongly try to prevent Israel from doing it. But short of that, I think if we don't prevent it by negotiation or by a strike, I do believe they'll strike.
One thing. Will you speculate with me on the very weird, but I suspect potentially financially motivated switcheroo on behalf of a lot of MAGA broadcast types? I think of Tucker Carlson, but a lot of others as well. What have the Iranians ever done to us? President can't do anything on Iran. Do you have any speculation or thoughts about what the provenance
neocons are
of
goading him into it, as Tucker Carlson put out on the Twitter the other day.
The neocons, yes.
The neocons.
We're doing our best.
Yes, I mean aren't enough neocons to fill a phone booth these days, I think. Well, my speculation is that a big piece of this is plain old anti-Semitism. And what it is basically saying is the president doesn't want to do this. The Jews are making him do it. It seems to me, disgusting and quite dangerous too. There's no recognition of the arguments. There's no debate over the arguments. They have on, Tucker has on people who will say what he wants them to say. And, when you don't have any argument other than the neocons, and what does neocon mean to somebody like Tucker Carlson? It means Jew warmonger. That's what he means. And that's what he's really saying. As I said, I think it's pretty disgusting. And it's also quite an insult of Donald J. Trump that the president isn't sufficiently intelligent and strong-minded to make up his own mind. He's going to be led around, not by his hand-picked staff, not by his Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor, but by the neocon warmongers. Where are they? I mean, in this administration,
Keep looking.
Laura Loomer has cleaned them out, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, I think that there's a difference I'm starting to notice in this Trump administration versus the first Trump administration. Everyone said in the first Trump administration, well, you had all these, not neocons, but say, establishment Republicans who were pushing Trump to do all sorts of establishment things. And now we've got this much more pure MAGA administration. We've weeded out all the neocons. We've gotten rid of them and all the rest of it. And you've got this isolationist faction that is not in line with Trump and is pushing him to restrain himself from his instincts. When we saw the Signal chat, I think the most fascinating thing of the Signal chat is that J.D. Vance was against hitting the Houthis. And the rest of his team was saying, well, no, the president made that decision. And he said, well, I'll go along with it. But it's very clear J.D. Vance, if he was president, wouldn't hit the Houthis, and he wouldn't hit anybody. He's an isolationist. And then when the Signal chat went out, they launched a campaign to get rid of Mike Waltz because he's a neocon. Waltz is completely in line with Donald Trump. Donald Trump this is the guy who killed Qasem Soleimani. This is the guy who bombed Syria twice. This is the guy who took out the Wagner fighters in Syria. This is the guy who launched a cyber attack on Russia. He's not afraid to use military force. I think that there's a faction of the administration that thinks that it's defending Trumpism in MAGA that is completely disconnected with what Trump's instincts are. And they're the ones trying to push him to not do what he knows is right.
I think that's right. And I think, an interesting thought experiment too is suppose the president does it. The president decides Iran is playing games with me. They're trying to build a nuclear weapon. We're going to do it. He does 1, 2, 3 days of strikes. He goes on TV and he says to the American people, I'm the 5th president who said they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. I'm the only one who actually acted on it.
Yep.
And you need to support me. We're going to have a stable and peaceful Middle East now because etc. The whole Republican Party, I would have thought, will on the Hill will come together. You think if Republican senators, okay, you might lose Rand Paul, Mike Lee. All the others will come together, and I think most in the House too. It'll be really interesting under those circumstances, which we may never get to see what people like Tucker Carlson say. The president was sadly, tragically misled, or do they change their tune overnight and say, well, he's privy to secrets that I don't know. I'm sure he did the right thing. I don't know what they're going to do if those circumstances ever eventuate.
Well, I'd love to find out.
Me too.
Me too. Me too. Me 3. Let's
Elliott,
hope that
you
Donald
are
Trump
awesome.
doesn't forget his principles that he articulated and that you so clearly read out from his first term. You were awesome as usual. Thoughtful, knowledgeable. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you again.
So, Danny, what do you think?
So, I mean, look, I thought Joe Biden was a terrible president. I couldn't believe what he did in Afghanistan. I couldn't believe that he just let Iran drift with no sanctions and no deal and no nothing. I couldn't believe he let Iran rebuild its economy and its support for Hezbollah. I couldn't believe, I couldn't believe he allowed NATO to collapse, allowed Russia to invade Ukraine. Joe Biden stunk as a not just on not just on the economy, but also on national security. And I really believed that, even though I didn't like some of Donald Trump's rhetoric in his first term, the great Mark Thiessen line, Donald Trump on mute, was really solid. He knew who the bad guys were. And even though he sometimes said he wanted to do business with Putin, the reality was we imposed more sanctions and more punishing sanctions on Russia in his first term than either his successor or his predecessor did, notwithstanding Putin's first invasion of Ukraine. Ditto for the maximum pressure campaign. Ditto for the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian terrorists, Hamas, all of the UN support. Trump was great on all of that stuff. And I'm starting to get a little nervous. And I think partly it's because I'm losing confidence in Steve Witkoff, because he's the one who's doing all of those things.
Did you have it?
But I don't understand how the president has gone from being a rock star on this stuff to being less of one, and I'm nervous about it.
So
what do you think?
I'm going to try and end this podcast on a hopeful note, and one that is designed to buck you up and to encourage you.
Give me faith.
Which is that for the one thing that we have learned about Donald Trump over the last 8 to 10 years, from the moment he walked down the escalator through his first term, through his interregnum, and the start of his presidency, is that for better or for worse, Donald Trump tends to do what he said he would do, right? He said he would secure the border. He did it. He said he would start a trade war. He did it, right? He does what he says he's going to do. And so Donald Trump has said that the JCPOA was a disaster and that he would never repeat it. And he said that Iran is that has 2 months to either give up its nuclear weapons or face bombing like the rich they've never seen. Maybe the deadline passes, but I have to believe that he's going to end up doing what he said he's going to do. And I think that is also true. I'm also hopeful about Ukraine. Donald Trump has said that if Putin doesn't agree to peace, he is going to give Ukraine more weapons, and he's going to impose secondary sanctions on the Russian oil production, which would crush the Russian economy because the oil and gas is the only thing that's keeping them afloat. I think that he likes to let negotiations go as long as they can because he really doesn't want to do those things. But I think when push comes to shove, he will. And there's a record to prove it. I mean, he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He told the Iranians, if you kill an American, I'm not going to hold your proxies responsible. I'm going to hold you responsible. And he killed Qasem Soleimani. And then he told them that if they retaliated, he would bomb them. And they backed down. So I'm going to end this by saying I'm hopeful that Donald Trump is going to do what he said he's going to do. He's going to try and negotiate it. And by the way, I'm one of those neocons Tucker's worried about pushing him towards war. I would rather that the Iranians do this peacefully. I have doubts whether they will. I'm pretty sure that Vladimir Putin is going to end the war in Ukraine without some kind of pressure. But you know what? I'm willing to give him a lot of ramp and a lot of runway to try and do it peacefully, because I feel that he's going to end up doing what he said he's going to do, because that's the record. So let's hope I'm right. And if I'm not,
let's hope you're right.
I'll say, and if I'm not right, I'll admit it and I'll call him out.
I'm having Ben clip that. Take care, everybody.
See you next week.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.